Hi again, everyone. Um, Today I am going to show you guys what it's like to apply some of the principles that a photographer use within a 3D environment. This is going to be on cinematic lighting and is actually part of a bigger series called A Photographer's Guide to Blender that we are making here on the channel. And we are doing this because we really think that what really makes your renders stand out is often uh, the same things that will make an image in real life look really nice and cinematic. And therefore, such things as camera angles and cinematic lighting will help you with your renders, making them more realistic and more beautiful. And today it's all about cinematic lighting. So I have created this scene right here, and I've set up a camera, and I'm not going to talk too much about the camera angle and the focal length and stuff like this. This will be part of another tutorial. Today it's more about lighting and lighting techniques that you can use within Blender and within 3D in general. And the first thing that I want to do when we are in here is set up my viewport here in two views, so that we have one for the viewfinder that you have in the camera, so what you see in the camera, and then the scene that we can play around in. So I will jump into the camera here, and what you can see here is that now we are in this frame. To make everything a bit more easy, I will remove this one, and I will also turn off these things, just so that we can have the perspective. It's okay. And to have an even more clearer image, I will go into the camera settings in here, and I will go into the viewport display, and under the perspective, I will turn it all the way up, and you can see that we remove all of the background in this view here. So this just shows us exactly what we get in our rendered view. So yeah, and it's a scene. It's a pretty simple scene set up with this sculpture of David, and it's not often that you are doing like portrait photography in 3D, but the principle that I show here can also be used within product photography, or a car, or anything else that you want to light up. It's all about the principles and how you can learn to understand them and then apply them and also experiment with them. And today I want to show you guys like 3 different kind of setups that I have brought with me today, and to kind of show you dramatic results that you can have. And yeah, let's just dive into it. So the first lighting setup that we are going to demonstrate here is what is called the Rembrandt light. And this is a lighting technique that is famous and was made famous by a painter called Rembrandt, that sort of in his portraits, in his paintings, he painted in light, to highlight the characters and create a more dynamic scene. And this light is really, a light, it's a single light that will light up the one side of your subject, and then it actually create a little triangle on the other side, on the shadow side, with the light under the other eye. And this is what is called the Rembrandt lighting. And you will see in a minute what that looks like. So our lighting is, in fact, this plane. You can, of course, go into the light properties and choose like an area light and set that up. But I actually found that I really like to just create a plane and then go into the the material properties here, and then instead of the principal BSDF, I will create an emission plane, and this will make this light like a light source. And I just think it's create a more realistic results from like a better highlight to shadow detail. And if we go into our, and this only works in cycles, so you need to use cycles for this one. In Eevee, you will have to use an area light instead. But yeah, if we go into the cycles so we can start viewing our renders, you will see that everything is quite dark here. It's not completely dark because, well, now it is, but I often like to set up an HDRI, and I do this because I really like the color effect that it has on my images. It makes it more realistic because in real life you also have light bouncing around with different colors. So I will put in an HDI, and as you see here, it will completely light up our scene. And just to illustrate even more, if I go out of this, you can see that we have like the sort of like the HDRI environment here. And I will go back, and this is a pretty nice image. Maybe we can do this and it will make it easier for you guys to see. But I actually think it's a bit boring, in my opinion. It is beautiful, but it doesn't really show what is possible within this environment and what it feels like to be a photographer. So I will actually dial this all the way down to 0.01, and this will just create a bit of ambient light. It probably doesn't do much, and you can experiment with the strength of it just to fill in the shadows. But for now, in this tutorial, I want to keep it rather contrasty for you guys' sake. Also, I'm going into the color management tab, and under the filmic and the look, I will choose high contrast. And this will, give even more contrast to your image, which is also part of lighting. That just makes the image so much more realistic and believable. In 3D renders, the images often come out flat, so we want to avoid that. And by adding contrast, and this is also something that will be done in the post-processing processes afterwards. That is also going to be another tutorial, but yeah, just remember contrasts. You need it and you want it. So here we have the dark scene, so we need to add in our Rembrandt lighting. So the plane here, as an emission, we can start filling it up with light. And I know the value needs to be around 3.5. And as you can see here, we already get a more dynamic image with more interesting light. And just to showcase what it is that we have done, you can see this side of the image, what to say, like the one side of the subject, our character, is in complete light, and then we actually have the let me just choose this one instead. Then we have the shadow side here, and we also have a shadow side here. And what is famous with Rembrandt lighting is that we actually have the triangle that I talked about right here, as you can see. Right under the shadowy eye, there's a little bit of spill lighting, and this just creates the effect of light, of dark light, or shadow light, and this will make the image much more dynamic compared to like a normal scene. Let me just remove this one, delete the keyframe. Going to one. So yeah, sorry for the confusion, but it's really what the Rembrandt lighting is doing, is it creates more depth in the light of the image. So yeah, but what can we do about this Rembrandt lighting? As a photographer, we are often in the challenges of having like one light and then removing light or adding light. And you can do this, like you can add a light and it will work. But I really like to do what we do as a photographer and use V-flats and bounce boards. And yeah, so like a bounce board is sort of like a white board that you normally have. If you go into this view here, you can see that it's just like a whiteboard, and with the roughness turned up. And what this has as an effect is that when we put this in close to our subject, it will actually fill in the shadow side. And you can see if I turn it off, it will get much darker. And you can play around with like how close it should be or how big it is. But this is a nice way to fill in shadows without adding light to the entire scene. It will of course make the image a bit less dramatic, but nevertheless, it's an effect that you might want to have. So yeah, this can also be applied to products or any other thing. It's just about like understanding how to control the light with light and with bounce boards or V-flats. So this is something that you can do if you want to add light. And if I just take this one way back and take my V-flat, this will add more shadow. It might not be as obvious here, but if I turn this off, maybe you're able to see that we have a bit less shadow on the shadow side. It's more bright now, and when I add in the V-flat, it gets a bit more dark. And this is something that you can also play around with, having more on the front if you want to, exaggerate it even more. But yeah, it's just to show you the effect that it can have when you add these sort of boards. And now you might say, but it's in the frame, and you're right, it's right here. But under the visibility, and this is something that we can do only in 3D, under the ray visibility, you can turn off the camera, and it will not be visible to the camera when you render it, which I think is a very cool feature. Yeah. But yeah, this is, a typical Rembrandt lighting. And normally I would have this light a bit more, like, should we say, I'll just show you, a bit more on the front and then rotate it like on an angle, right, like right here. But as you can see, our character is turning his head to the side, so this will just completely light up his head, actually making it more of a like a beauty lighting for like more female style sort of photography and lighting. But as his side, we need to play around, moving a bit back, so we only get like the shadow on where we want it, and get the triangle under his eyes to creating the Rembrandt lighting. And this is the most typical portrait light. So yeah, let's move on. So the next light setup that I have is like a more traditional cinematic lighting, which is a top and a back lighting. So I will just remove the V-flat, and I will, just for the sake of it, I will turn the emission down. I will take this one. We'll first create the top lighting. I will rotate it 90 degrees and move it up above, and like more just above our subject here. So this is just the top lighting, and this will also create a really nice effect when I turn this on. So as you can see, this is like also a bit dramatic in another kind of way. Just to annotate it here again, we actually like the blue more. Up here we have light from the top, which is also hitting his shoulders, but we get all of the face and the front of the face in shadow, which is also like a top lighting and also sort of like a backlighting. What you really want to achieve for cinematic results is that where your camera is, on the camera side, there needs to be shadow first and then light. And this means that you will actually have a lot more shadow in your scene than you think, but this will just create a much more interesting and dramatic image. So here we have in the front the face in shadow, and we have his top of his head and the shoulders in light. And this is a really beautiful light that is also like replicating like lighting from a window up top, or anything else. Let me just remove this. And for the backlighting, it's a bit different. I will turn this off again. I will rotate it 90 degrees again, and rotate it 90 degrees again, and then move it behind our character, move it down, and then actually want to fill out the frame with it. And when I turn this one on, it will create an entirely different result. So this result is also really nice, and something that's, like a silhouette light. And what this is showing is also a cinematic and dramatic lighting. Right on the edge of our character here, David, you can see that there is light emitted. We still have the front of David in the shadow, and this is also something that we want and we think is beautiful and cinematic. It's not often that you use this light, but I can think of a few ways that this can be used. Also for like creating entirely white backdrops, and then put in a light for like a product render, or it can be useful to use these planes as background with the missions to create like light from the back. But this is like the backlight, so to speak. Here, let me just go back here just to get the top lighting again. So this is a really nice and interesting lighting setup, the top and the back. For our third installment in lighting, we're going even more complex, and I just want to show you what this is for a type of lighting. So I will go back to what I had before with like the Rembrandt lighting here. Let me just see here. I think, and you need to figure around with this yourself just to know. It all depends on the scene and the subject. Something else that I want to talk about is something that is known as the inverse square law, and it's quite a hard subject to understand, but it actually matters what size your light source is in relation to the subject. And this might seem obvious, but you can see we have a strength now here at 3.5, and it actually means that the larger the light source is compared to the subject, the softer the light will be. So right now we actually have quite a nice and soft transition from the light path to the dark path, and this is all because the size of this light source is relatively large, not that much, but relative to the subject and close. So just to illustrate, when I move this one back, we have of course we get a lot less light, but but it stays the same size, but it's just more moved away. If we then think about that we need to add more light, we can do that. Let's just say 50, a lot more light. This will create a kind of a different image, because we have strength that is there relative to what we have before. Our lightest part is just as light as it was before, but our shadow sides are much darker, and this image is much more dramatic in some ways. It actually looks quite nice, I think, but it's because the plane and the light source is not large in relation to our subject. So we to have that like beautiful and soft lighting, we need to have it closer, but then turn down the kind of light that we have. So yeah, so let's just go back. So it's just something that you need to think about, and you can, check this out a lot of other places as well. But yeah, for now, let's end this tutorial with our last light setup. So I talked about having like a dynamic image is when you have like shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow, light. So how much can we do this with this scene? So if we take for example, our black flat right here and move it up here, we will get more shadow on this side, of course, as we talked about before. If we then take, let's say, this softbox, which is actually the same as the other one, and move it just up here, and, angle it, let's say, 45 degrees, just behind our subject, we can take this light, and what happens is that this should hopefully create, let's just set the strength to 3. Yeah, this will, add what is called a rim light or a hair light or a backlight. It has many names for our subject. So we have a really like 3D kind of realistic dynamic lighting setup right now. Of course, we have also spilled a bit of light on the background with this light, the emission light. What you can do in here is that you can, take our plane and just crank down the light, and then you will have what we talked about. Or you can go into the exposure and you can crank down the exposure, and then this is actually what you would do with a camera in real life, and you would just crank up the lights on your light sources. But yeah, I think this looks nice and works for the purpose. So what you can see here is that, let me just use the annotate again, that our rim light creates a rim on his hair and on his shoulder here. And we have the Rembrandt triangle, and we have the entire left side of our character in light here. And this just makes really interesting because we have the light, we have shadow, we have light, we have shadow, and we have light again. And this really makes for a dynamic image. So yeah, but you can just go out and experiment with all of these lighting setups and, create, and mix them and do whatever you want. Even if you have like a product, you can also take like, should we say and take a point light, for example. You can put it right behind our subject, and you can, crank this one up, and if you move this in, you will have, if we just take our, it's under our collection. If we take our background, move it, not remove it. But yeah, the effect should be that we can sort of, let's make it dark, and let us put it in here, is that you can see that we, by having this point light here, can create sort of like a light in the background. It's not something that I do a lot, but it can be done. It might be something that you want to use in your cinematic renders. But yeah, let me just go back to what we had before, just like this, and just remove this and remove this. Yeah, and another trick that I want to end this tutorial with is, if you go down into color management, sometimes when you see this, or you think it's beautiful, and you think, okay, it looks fine, but then it still looks kind of flat, and it's because you don't really, you're eyeballing the contrast and the like the light in the scene. And Blender has what is also something that you have in cameras called false color, and that is the camera showing you with colors the temperature of the light, or like the light strength, so to say, not the temperature, but the strength of the light. So if you go down into color management and into the filmic, you can actually choose the false color, just change it to filmic when you render it out, or you will get this one. But you can see here that we get what we have with our lighting just in colors. So you can see here it's almost kind of overexposed because it's so red over here, but in real life you actually do kind of have overexposed images. In some areas it's more realistic, so I will keep it here. And then you can see we also have the triangle right here under his eye. There's also a bit of light. And the shadow side with the green and the blue, and then the backlight that we put in really puts like a sort of a fine line of light on his back and shoulder and hair. So yeah, you could just, if I turn this all the way down, like this, it will look really dark, and so this is just a way, to experiment. And you can see, okay, if you have a scene that looks like this, maybe like this, it's definitely like sort of overexposed, and that's what you go for. But you can see here we lose a lot of detail. Still, actually, it looks quite cool, but you still lose quite a lot of detail. So let's just go back to what we find actually could be a bit brighter, but nevertheless, for this purpose, it's just like a nice trick, something that a photographer would use, or like a filmmaker would use. Especially in film, you use it a lot. So yeah. So this was all for this tutorial. Hope you learned something from it, and see you for the next one. Bye.